Start.
Okay, Wayne, I hear you loud and clear.
Great. Hold on. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to No Lord's Spiritual or Temporal, the First Great Awakening and the American Revolution. I am Wayne Pond. I'll be moderating this evening's seminar. Before we get underway, let's do some housekeeping. Let me take a moment to introduce you to the National Humanities Center. There I am, and there is the Humanities Center. The Humanities Center is located in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. It is the country's only independent institute for advanced study in all of the branches of the humanities. Let me explain what that means. The center is a private, nonprofit organization. The main program is a fellowship program that brings scholars from the United States as well as abroad to the Humanities Center for an academic year to conduct research and to write books on subjects in the humanities, disciplines such as history, literature, language, ethics, philosophy, criticism of the arts. Since the center opened in 1978, 1,300 scholars have conducted research at the Humanities Center, and they have produced some 1,300 books. Now, looking at these photographs, you might say that the place seems like an ivory tower, but we want to connect the work of the center with a wide array of audiences. And that means especially people like you, teachers. The center does that through online seminars, through anthologies of primary resources, through secondary sources, and through lessons. Let me invite you to learn all about the center's offerings for teachers at americainclass.org. americainclass.org. You see it there in the upper left-hand portion of your screen. From that page, you can access our new product, America in Class Lessons. These are designed to align with the new Common Core state standards. They focus on a single text or image or a small number of primary resources. They are based on a framing question. They define an essential understanding of the issue at hand. They provide online access to texts or to images. They offer a background essay so that you'll be able to teach the material with confidence. They offer practical teaching advice. They provide key excerpts for in-class analysis. They offer discussion questions, and in some cases, they provide a follow-up assignment. Thus far, we have sponsored 8 lessons that range from early visual representations of the New World to the cult of domesticity. You see those topics there on the left-hand side of your screen. When you visit americainclass.org, the lessons, the website, please click on the octopus icon there in the middle of the screen to order a free poster. Clicking on the octopus icon will lead you to this page where you'll be able to place your order for the poster that depicts a political cartoon called The Curse of California from 1882. A newspaper called The Wasp. The poster is an excellent tool for teaching about monopolistic business practices in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It is carefully annotated. On the back, you'll learn about the Humanities Center's offerings for teachers and how to access them. and you'll get some advice on how to teach the image. Let me remind you that after the seminar, you'll be able to access a recording of the proceedings this evening, plus the PowerPoint at No Lord's Spiritual or Temporal. That's the website's name, the same site from which you obtained the readings. You'll also find there an evaluation form. This is important. We ask that you please take a few minutes to complete it, send it to us. You can do this online. It's very important we pay attention to what you have to tell us about these seminars. Once we have received your evaluation, we'll send you a letter documenting your participation in the seminar that you'll be able to present at home to get whatever credit the seminar entitles you to. All right, now here's how the seminar will work tonight. Professor Tim Breen of Northwestern University, who I'll introduce in just a moment, will contextualize excerpts from the readings, some of which we will analyze through discussion. To participate in the discussion, you can send us a chat message by placing your cursor in the message box in the lower right-hand side of your screen, typing your message, and simply hitting send. I will bring the chat discussion into the seminar as we move along. So let's get underway. Here are some of the goals of this evening's seminar. To deepen your understanding of the First Great Awakening and the role it played in the life of the American colonies, to provide fresh primary resources and instructional approaches for use with your students, and to enable you to make historical judgments about the Awakening's influence on the American Revolution. Now, we've had any number of excellent questions that have been submitted to the forum for this seminar. There are 8 of them. It's going to take me a moment, but they bear repeating. So please take note of these. We are going to look at issues such as, is the topic shortchanged? Is it treated fairly in American history textbooks? How did the ideas of the First Great Awakening influence the founders of the United States? What is the connection between the First Great Awakening and political activism? How did the First Great Awakening change the religious culture of the colonies, including the role of ministers? How should teachers teach the First Great Awakening without raising so-called God questions that are difficult, if not impossible, to address in class? What's the difference between the First and the Second Great Awakenings? Is the Great Awakening best understood as a movement toward equality that so characterized the early republic? And finally, did the Great Awakening influence the political content of backcountry teaching as the revolution approached? All right, to discuss those and other questions, we'll frame the discussion with several overarching questions. Does the First Great Awakening lead to new forms of political participation? How did the First Great Awakening and the new evangelicalism that it spawned transform the religious culture of ordinary men and women? And how did George Whitefield and other evangelists create a new religious culture? So, to lead us through all of this very challenging material, it's a great pleasure to introduce my friend and former colleague, Timothy Breen. Timothy H. Breen is the William Smith Mason Professor of American History at Northwestern University. He was a fellow of the Humanities Center on 2 occasions, and there you see some of the titles of Professor Breen's very prolific and productive career. Now, let me get down to Tim's name here just a minute so that I can pass the microphone to him. All right. Tim, I'm going to turn the proceedings over to you, and you can move through the slides as you choose. Here's Professor Breen.
You can hear me, Wayne?
I can.
Great. Well, look, it's great to be back with you. I'm sorry that we had some problems a couple of weeks ago since that time. I've been lecturing about the revolution and American Revolution in all places in Dublin, Ireland. Some of you who are Irish will recognize my name, Tim Breen, as a good Irish lad, and I'm really happy to be back here and working with you and Wayne Pond, who's a dear friend. I can assure you that what he said about the Humanities Center is absolutely correct. If you ever get a chance to come down there, I think you'll be pleasantly pleased. And I also want to thank you all for some terrific questions you've been sending in. We're going to try to answer them as best we can. They're good questions. They're open-ended questions. And if I fail along the way to address one, you please remind me and Wayne, because we really want this topic to resonate positively with you and eventually with your students. Because there's no question in my mind as a professor and writer about the revolution and about religion that religion's important. I mean, obviously, that's an obvious statement. But we all know it's difficult to teach because some people think, well, look, it's too sensitive, it's intrusive, or as Wayne was saying, raising philosophic problems. I understand that. But I also understand that in the 18th century, from the middle of the 18th century, all the way up to today, religion has been central, absolutely central, to how ordinary men and women have tried to make sense of their world. And they've done it for a very long time. I guess what I'm trying to say is that religion has a history. It has a history that goes back to the origins of our country and in the colonies, and it has influenced economics, it's influenced politics in profound ways. Sometimes we disagree. Sometimes we think that religious figures have made mistakes. I understand that. But whether we agree with a theology or a sect or rather strongly disagree, there's no doubt that as teachers we cannot afford to ignore religion. There was a time when I was a graduate student that people in political science postulated that religion would just disappear. It was part of the modernization project. We'd all become secular individuals. We now know that that's not going to happen, and it has not happened throughout the world. So bringing religion thoughtfully, intellectually, back into the classroom is a wonderful and important challenge. Now, I have brought them together tonight for you some documents. I hope you like. They are selected to highlight the first Great Awakening, but of course that ramifies throughout later evangelical movements. The central figure is going to be a person that I hope you and your students take very seriously, because he was as profound in shaping our culture as any of the founding fathers. I mean that. It sounds like George Whitefield was a pioneer of religion, and he has made, I mean, even in our election this very fall, you can hear echoes of Whitefield's contribution to American life. So with that, we'll move forward. And again, Wayne, I'm sure you're watching for questions on the chat board.
I am, Tim, and everybody is sending you happy greetings, and I will keep an eye on the chat box there for us.
That's great. I like your happy greetings. It's a little cool, a little damp in Evanston, Illinois tonight. I need all the happy greetings you can come send along. George Whitefield, and you notice, by the way, it's spelled correctly here on your slide. It looks like Whitefield, but in the way the English pronounce his name, they drop the E, and it's properly pronounced George Whitefield. And he actually helped invent, that's a strong word, a new religious culture in 18th century America. How was that defined? What are the signs of the new religion? Because it as I say, it changed American life for the next 200 years. First, the evangelicals introduced a new form of preaching of giving of sermons that stressed emotion, the felt need to be in contact with the spiritual movers, be in contact in a felt way with the Redeemer and with the Lord. And this clashed very much with an older, more highly intellectual, theological form of religion. So that the older theologians looked at Whitefield as a great threat, because he came and he said, don't tell me how you think about theology. Tell me how you feel about Jesus. And just those words. So the new form of emotion. Second, and implicit in what I said, he abandoned formal theology. He never said, look, let's think as Methodists, let's think as Baptists, or Episcopalians, or Congregationalists, or Presbyterians. He said, what matters is how you feel about your own spiritual state of being. Are you saved? Are you in touch with the Redeemer? And one of the key elements in that message, and you're going to see it in the documents tonight, is a sense of the new birth. That by just the evangelicals stress to people that at any time in your life you could peel away your sinful being and reinvent yourself in a spiritual way. That was a new and exciting message. People were invited to come forward and rethink their very spiritual being. And the last element is absolutely key. Is he practiced, and the evangelicals practiced itinerant preaching. They didn't stay in single churches. They were on the road. They were on the move. They preached to crowds of people wherever they could come together. These were all extraordinarily new elements, and they were very, very threatening to the elites of the time. A new emotion, the call for the rebirth, and the practicing of itinerant preaching. And this all occurred in the middle of the 18th century, and it was a radical break with religious history.
Tim, let's move on. Give us just maybe 90 seconds or so here on George Whitefield himself. You mentioned, does he live and die completely in the 18th century?
He does. If we're you see on the slides, born in 1714 in England. He was remained English all of his life, and he kept coming to America on tours. Died actually in America. I hope we have time tonight, Wayne. I want to tell a little story, but I'm going to say he died in New England in 1770 when he was on one of his evangelical tours. As a young man, he found his greatest skill. He had a beautiful voice, and a lot of people thought he would be an actor. But he became the boy preacher, and went up to college, where he worked with the founders of the Methodist faith, the Wesley brothers, and then he took his mission to Ireland and to Scotland, and eventually coming to Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, first time in 1738, Wayne. And then after that, again and again, he brought the word of this new faith to various cities in America. So you see it. He actually, his picture, he was badly, he had a wandering eye, sort of looks a little cross-eyed, but whenever people heard his word, they were moved. Now here, we're on George Whitefield's journals. He kept journals, and we see here from 1740, that was a key year. These are his words. Preached to about 15,000 people in the morning, went twice to church and heard myself taken to task by the commissary who preached these words. I bear them record, they have zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. I could have wished he had considered the next words, for they, being ignorant of God's righteousness, have not submitted themselves to the righteousness of God.
Now, this paragraph, Tim, let me just jump in. This paragraph really has some very key points about Whitefield. For example, the size of the audience that he's preaching to, and then the differentiation that he's making between a knowledge of God and an intellectual approach. in contrast to that emotional approach that you were describing.
Absolutely. Here he's picking up here that he's being criticized for not having the old-fashioned university-based theology. And he's coming back and he said, no, I mean, don't tell me about knowledge. Tell me about your feeling of righteousness. That's Wayne, this is the true message of the new evangelicals. Now, about the crowd, 15,000 people. Boston at this time, Philadelphia, barely had 15,000 total population. So if these numbers, I mean, let's say they're exaggerated. Of course, they're probably exaggerated. But even if they're exaggerated, there's never been in the colonial and English world anything like this. Huge numbers of people are coming out to hear the new word of Christ through this man.
We have a question on the chat, Tim, that's very interesting. The question is, did the kind of preaching, the stage, so to speak, that Whitefield moved on, did it have gender implications? Is it, to put it crudely, too early in our history to think about questions like that?
Well, all I know is that more than other more formal forms of religion, Whitefield had the capacity to take the message, the evangelical message, to men, but also to women, to poor, but also to richer sorts, to people of color, as opposed as white. In other words, the searing, as Jonathan Edwards said, it's like a lightning flash. It's a heart wound. This word, when you hear it, it's like a heart wound, and it touched people of all colors, all backgrounds, and all genders.
Right. How were these, again, to touch on this business of the audience, this is obviously before the days of public address systems. How did people actually hear this man and connect with him?
This is an amazing thing. We're going to have a little document down soon, Wayne, from Benjamin Franklin, who doubted, as I guess some of the participants, how could you hear 15,000? But we have diaries, we have other records, and there was such silence, such respect for this man that he often spoke from an elevated stage, almost like if I might say, Woodstock kind of thing. But people claimed that they could hear his word for huge distances. He had a capacity to throw his voice in a way that made this possible.
So not only does he have a voice that is immediate and appealing, but in a sort of symbolic sense, does this voice connect with our larger concern about the foreground, the background to the American Revolution?
Well, he's reaching out to all people. He's asking all people, again, men and women, black and white, rich and poor, to think for themselves, to criticize established institutions of the faith and to experience the rebirth. Now, whether this has political overtones or not, the participants tonight can decide, but there's a highly individualistic element of this new revival that invites people, as I say, to think for themselves. If we go on to this next one, you see what we're talking about, Wayne. The poor people were much concerned at my bidding them farewell. He's leaving Philadelphia. And after I take my leave, many came to my lodging, sorrowing that they were to see my face no more for a long season. Nearly 50 Negroes came to give me thanks for what God had done to their souls. These Negroes, these Black African Americans, are probably slaves, and yet they too, in the crowd, they feel the same impact as the others. It's a truly universal message.
So you got the word equality hovering above all of this.
Equality to receive the new birth. If you refuse to open your heart to the new birth, that's your problem. But all people, black and white, rich and poor, have the capacity to hear the new evangelical new message, Wayne, and it seems to work. Now we're listening. Of course, we're listening to George Whitefield himself. He's a little biased. I mean, obviously, he thinks he's doing a good job.
Mm-hmm.
But here we say religion is all the talk. In other words, it's created an extraordinary excitement. I think I can say the Lord Jesus has gotten himself the victory in many hearts. People all sorts are feeling this new concern. Pressing, and then down on line 5 now, pressing upon me to baptize their infants. And I did comply with as many as I could, but I was obliged sometimes to say, the Lord sent me not to baptize, but to preach the gospel.
Tim, it's tempting to look at that quotation from Whitefield and read into it. Oh, I guess a harsh way to put it would be that, sort of a self-serving angle. But my sense is that is not the case. That this is sincere talk from a sincere heart.
Well, I mean, it's hard to know, I mean, he was a sincere man. He also had a mighty large ego to pull this off. I mean, otherwise, the suffering of travel and some of the indignities and the attacks on him by his critics would have been hard. But yeah, he recognizes that he's bringing a new form of religion to the masses, and it's very exciting for him. And so what's happening is people want him to baptize their children, and he's saying, hey, I got a bigger problem here. I'm come here to preach the gospel, but I mean, I'm bringing the new birth to these people.
Why? What about that word baptism? Just go back to that for a half a minute, Tim. Why was it so important?
Many people in the colonies, as they settled, especially the backcountry, Wayne, in Virginia, North Carolina, Western Pennsylvania, were separated from formal churches. And when they had children, they wanted their children baptized. It's a very important element, as I'm sure all the people listening to me in the life cycle. And so they would flock to Whitefield when they knew he was in the area and say, please baptize my child. And he was willing to do it, but it sometimes became an end in itself. And he wanted to, get on with the evangelical moment, the revival. He wanted to get on with the revival.
Fair enough.
So he's complaining a little bit there. And here we see in the last part of the journals that I've selected for tonight, great numbers of inhabitants would have built me immediately a very large church if I would have consented. That's very interesting. They want to treat him as almost a divine figure, but he refuses it because he knows that he said to make them place the church again as they would have done for a long time in the church walls. In other words, he's worried that they're going to suck him back into the old religion, the formal religion. They're going to build him a church, and he knows that church, the walls of the church, could be his own kind of prison house.
Right.
And the evangelicals, of course, want to be itinerant. They want to be on the move. They want to be out of doors and reach these big crowds. That's the danger.
Tim, before you move on, a couple of our folks have asked about the issue of slavery. Did Whitefield actually preach against it, or was that a sort of sub rosa theme in his preachings?
Those are very good questions, and I'll be honest with you. He almost never criticized slavery. But what he did was he criticized masters, slave owners, for not letting their slaves hear the word of God. In other words, he wanted all people to hear about the new birth. But the institution of slavery itself, he did not address. I wish he had, but he didn't. And so he didn't want a church in his honor. He wanted an open conversation, a series of wonderful revivals that he and then he brought in allies, other people in America who copied and carried the word of Whitefield. So pretty soon there were revivals everywhere. Now if you think, Wayne, we go on to the next document, because I wanted to get across to you people tonight that very simple, very ordinary people. We're not talking about founding fathers. We're not talking about leaders. We're talking about people whose lives have suddenly been transformed by this new faith, this new evangelical faith. And such a person is Nathan Cole. He was a simple farmer and lived in a little town, Kensington, Connecticut, in central Connecticut. And one day, he and his wife heard that Whitefield was coming to Connecticut, coming down the Connecticut Valley from Massachusetts. And he wrote, Cole did, one of the most moving testimonies of how this new faith can just tear at you and make demands on your spiritual and emotional life that just weren't there before. You can see that he became a Baptist eventually in 1778, but that's not as important as experiencing evangelical religion. Now,
Tim, just a gentle time check here. We're 30 minutes in. We have 1 hour to go.
Okay, thank you. And I really appreciate you sending all these questions and comments along, and Wayne and I will try to address them. But listen, it's almost poetry. This guy, Nathan Cole, is just a farmer. He's not even very prosperous. And he hears that now it pleased God to send Mr. Whitefield into this land. This is almost scriptural language. And my hearing of his preaching at Philadelphia, like one of the old apostles, and many thousands flocking to hear him preach the gospel. The number game, the fact that so many people heard him, that's important. The great numbers were converted to Christ. I felt the Spirit of God drawing me by conviction. I longed to see and hear him and wished he would come this way. The very talk of this new religion, the excitement that it's generating, the energy it's generating, has already touched Cole, and he's not even heard Whitefield yet.
This is amazing stuff. Apart from Whitefield's ego, apart from whether he wants a church built in his honor, apart from the nature of his audiences, this kind of personal testimony to the sincerity of what this man is doing, or the imminent reality in religious terms of what he's doing, is very important.
Well, this Cole business captures the emotional content of this new religion. And I stress to all of the participants tonight that this is a transformative change. Just as much as the American Revolution is transformative in political terms, Whitefield brought a new kind of religious sensibility. And here's Cole again. He when he says we, that means Nathan Cole and his wife. They had one horse. She'd get on it and ride for a while, then he'd get on it and ride. We went down in a stream, but heard no man speak a word all the way for 3 miles, but everyone pressing forward in great haste. And we got to Middletown, the old meeting house. There was a great multitude. It was said to be 3,000 or 4,000 of people assembled together. Wow, that's bigger than all the people in Middletown, the 3,000 or 4,000 people. And they've come from the little towns like Kensington and along the Connecticut Valley. And if you know, all these little farm towns, they've come because they've heard through the newspapers and through word of mouth that this great event was going to happen.
Tim, let me stop you for a moment. There are some questions that are cropping up in the chat section here about the relationship between the first and the second Great Awakenings. One person wanted to ask about how the first Great Awakening sets the stage for the Shakers, for the Mormons, groups like that. Can you spend a moment or two talking about the continuity between the two Great Awakenings, so to speak?
Sure, I'll give it a try, and if I'm not clear, please keep it coming. The Great Awakening, I mean, once these revivals started, it's like the trivial observation of throwing a stone into a pond. You get waves of revivals. Sometimes they die down a little bit, and then they come back in fiery new revivals. Maybe a preacher has some charisma. And so the distinction between the first and the Great Awakening is a little misleading. Once Whitefield set this new call for the new birth, it took root, and it's especially spread west into Ohio and into Kentucky in the early 19th century. What happened was that religion as practiced by Protestants in America became evangelical and itinerant after Whitefield, and all the way up into the Civil War and afterwards, all these revivals owe everything to the First Great Awakening.
One person writes in the chat, asks about the sort of quotidian life that was being led by the people who would be listening to Whitefield, the sort of ordinariness of it, the mundane kind of life that that these people were living. Another of our participants says, was this a form of entertainment? Did it, if only because it deviated from the, sort of daily grind of what these people were living through?
I think that's a terrific observation, and it doesn't make it trivial to say it's entertainment. But look, here you have an Englishman coming to America. He's written about. You'll hear stories about, and he comes to your town. And he directs his message. It seems like he directs his message right at you. Just a little farmer. Suddenly you're an important person. Suddenly he's asking you to come to Christ. He's asking you to experience the new birth. I suspect, Wayne, that must have been an extraordinary, empowering moment.
One of
for ordinary people, yeah.
One of our participants says this is what happens in a world where that appears to be inconsequential when somebody comes into your life and in a very powerful sense says, God has a plan for you.
Absolutely. And basically it's an invitation to you, a nobody, to have this rebirth, reinvent yourself. And suddenly you're not a nobody. You're part of this wonderful movement that had never been present before. That's why, and I stress the participants tonight, that's why I said this is one of the most radical transformations in American history. And it's been overlooked because I think we don't pay much attention to religion as we should.
Now, here we have Nathan Cole, who is saying very positive and good things about Mr. Whitefield. I don't want to derail you, Tim. It may not be germane to what you're doing, but did Whitefield have his critics? Were there cynics who were, or detractors?
Yeah, Wayne, we're going to come to one in a minute, and Chauncy, but just before we turn that, I'd like you to hear this Nathan Cole when he finally sees Whitefield. Whitefield was a man only in his 20s then, and when I saw Mr. Whitefield come upon the scaffold, you see it's a raised scaffold that we talked about how they heard him. He looked almost angelic.
Yeah, this could be from the Scarlet Letter. This could be Mr. Dimsdale on the scaffold.
Well, what we've seen is Cole is already so primed to have an emotional experience even before, and then this confirms him. This slim, slender youth, but for some thousands of people with a bold, undaunted countenance in my hearing, how God was with him everywhere he came along. It solemnized my mind. There's a mass movement here that people are looking at their neighbors who are having this experience, and then pretty soon they say, gee, I feel it too. And we're all part of this new revival culture, if you will. And entertainment, maybe. Mass movement, maybe. Mobilizing for Christ. But whatever it is, there had never been anything like this before.
One of our participants wants to know if the appearances of George Whitefield made an economic impact on these towns that he visited.
Well, that's a good question, and I don't think there's been a lot of research on that. There's one book called about Whitefield called Peddler of Divinity, and certainly there were a lot of pamphlets and sermons published. Benjamin Franklin published a lot of Whitefield's sermons and claimed he made a lot of money, even though he himself thought evangelical religion was a stupid waste of time. When it came to making money, Franklin figured out how to do it on the revival. So there you go.
The more things change, the more they stay the
Yeah.
same.
Now, one thing is that you should understand, and this goes out into the second Great Awakening and other Great Awakenings, is that once Whitefield is gone and the burden is on you, sometimes the emotional problems of keeping the flame of your new birth alive creates almost insurmountable tensions. And so here's Whitefield, here's Cole. It had pleased God to bring my conviction more. I was loaded with the guilt of sin. I saw I was undone. This is a man preparing for insight into the new birth, but it's painful. I kept all by myself as much as could. I went month after month mourning and begging for mercy. This is not a crazy man. This is not somebody that you would shun. This is your neighbor who suddenly had everything he thought he believed torn apart. Poor me. It took me most of all my comfort of eating, drinking, sleeping, or working. Again, he's been touched by the new birth, and it's almost unhinged, the poor man.
Was this a maybe not universal, but this was not uncommon for sentiments like this to find expression in the lives of ordinary people? Is that right, Tim?
Well, it's not it clearly touched many people, and some, of course, lost all their senses. They rolled on the floor. They lost control over their arms and legs. They wiggled and they mouthed other languages. But what makes Nathan Cole so exceptional, Wayne, is that he wrote this down in this beautiful poetic way. I mean, he's unusual in the sense that he captured more fully than others what was going on.
Fair enough. Let's move on to Charles Chauncy.
Right. Well, you asked, and I said, people were the critic. Who did Whitefield represent a threat? Did they just see him as a passing storm?
This man looks like he's mad at everybody.
He doesn't look like he has breakfast. But he was the leading elite Boston minister, congregational clergyman in Boston, as it says. He went to Harvard, and he has all the right set. And so what we see is the old faith, the old theology confronting Whitefield. Now we saw Cole. Cole's an ordinary farmer, and he's just emotionally excited and energizing. Chauncy has a different. Now here's the mind.
Tim, let me stop you before you move ahead with Chauncy. Good question here from one of our folks. To what extent were ordinary people excluded from religious opportunities or the religious atmosphere in the yet to be country prior to the First Great Awakening?
Well, since most churches were based around parishes, if you were near a church, you oftentimes had access to the elements that make faith so important to many of us: marriage, baptism, burial of your family. But if you weren't near a church, you were often excluded, and it was this mass of what some historians have called unchurched people that were drawn to the new evangelicals.
Fair enough. I don't want to distract you. Back to Charles Chauncy.
No. Look, your questions and the participants are. That's why we're here tonight. And so we got to make this clear. Chauncy is writing a letter, and he says, "Look, the minds of people in the part of the world have been greatly prepossessed in favor of Mr. Whitefield from the accounts transmitted to him from time to time. Accordingly, when he came to town about 2 years since, he was received as though he had been an angel of God." Now, we think of Cole. Cole said when he looked at this young man, just 20, speaking on, he said he was angelic. And now here's a critic reporting the same thing.
Yeah, and one of our participants says, just turn the compass 180 degrees, whereas one of our sources says practically makes him an angel. This one sounds cynical, as though he's jealous, or even saying that this is a blasphemous kind of thing.
Well, yeah, this is a member of the elite in Boston. And he's trying to make sense of, because suddenly the people in the church, people seeking spiritual comfort, are not acting like they did. It says he was strangely flocked after, strangely, because we have by all sorts of persons and much admired by the vulgar, both great and small.
So what is the nature then of Chauncey's claim that no one was like Whitefield?
Well, I mean, he was a pioneer. He was introducing this new form of itinerant evangelical religion. And Chauncy had never seen it before. And so he assumes it must be, vulgar people, poor people, uneducated people.
Yeah.
They, of course, people like that would be more prone to emotion, Wayne, not good Harvard graduates who are logical and book read.
Was Chauncy himself a minister?
Yes, he was the leading congregational minister in Boston.
That's an odd attitude to look down your nose at your congregation that way.
Well, but they're suddenly becoming pushy. They're asking questions. They're criticizing their ministers for being, as they said, stone cold. I mean, once the evangelicals moved forward, the parishioners asked. They said, "Look, we not only want to feel Christ in our lives, we want to see that our ministers feel it." In other words, so what Chauncy is seeing is a new critical mass out there. It's unimaginable what excesses and extravagances that people were running into. Wow, this is new.
Yeah.
And even encouraged. The same houses of worship were scarce emptied night nor day for a week together, and unheard of instances of supposed, you can see him say, religion were carried on in them. They're supposed because he can't understand what the hell's going on.
This is the first example of air quotes in American history, right?
Right, exactly. Now, people are raising questions, I see, in the chat room about Catholics. There were not a lot of Catholics in America before the great migrations of the early 19th century, when people like my family came over from Ireland, to some extent from Germany. There was a small settlement of Catholics in Maryland. But what we're reading about here, and if we want to understand the Great Awakening's influence on the American Revolution, it's overwhelmingly a Protestant phenomenon.
Fair enough. Tim, quick reminder, we are at 7:45 East Coast time. We have 45 minutes to go.
Okay. Now we're Benjamin Franklin. You all think you know Benjamin Franklin, and you do. He's perhaps associated with the Enlightenment. Here's a guy that has scientific experiments, goes out on a rainy night with his little kite and captures the lightning. Everybody likes good old Ben Franklin. But he's trying to make sense, just like Chauncy. And just like Cole, here is one of the smartest men in America trying to make sense of a new phenomenon. In 1739, he arrived among us from Ireland, where there had been a great revival. The Reverend Mr. Whitefield, who made himself remarkable there as an itinerant preacher. We're already identifying this movement, people on the move for Jesus or for the... He was first permitted to preach in some of our churches, but the clergy, taking a dislike to him, soon refused him their pulpits, and he was obliged to preach in the field. Then the multitudes of all sects and denominations that attended were enormous. Now, this is not Cole. This is not Whitefield bragging about his own success. This is a largely secular deist man, Franklin. I've never seen anything like this. And
why is that word itinerant important, Tim? I mean, it filtered through Franklin's eyes as well as Chauncey's.
The itinerants were people on the road, people on the move, who, again, as you earlier, were bringing religion, bringing baptism, bringing the helping succor of the church to people that had been unchurched before. I mean, another way to look at it is the delivery system of religion went up a notch. It was as if we suddenly went from telephones to computers, if you will. It's probably a bad analogy. But suddenly, hundreds of thousands of Americans who had not had adequate religious support were at least getting itinerants to come to their town once in a while and tell them about the religion, the emotions of this new religion.
Well, now, if you have a change, as you say, in the delivery system, what about the change in changes in the well springs of the theology or the preaching themselves? One, I'm looking at a question here about the differences between and among Lutheranism, Calvinism, all the sort of isms that would have contributed to what we generally call Protestantism at the time that Whitefield is moving around.
Well, look, are there differences between Luther and Calvin? Of course there are, and theologians made a lot out of this, and they're important. If you're a Lutheran, you look at things differently from, I was raised as a Presbyterian, and so on. But what's happening here is that these evangelicals are saying, let's move beyond this. You know, we all share something very fundamental, and that fundamental is our soul and the experience of the new birth. And so the evangelical movement transformed Lutherans, transformed Presbyterians, Baptists.
Fair enough. Back to Benjamin Franklin. Again, I don't want to distract you.
Yeah. Well, now, he said, soon after, this is a wonderful thing, because this man, again, Franklin is not secular, but boy, he's right on the cynical side of religion. It happened soon after to attend one of his sermons, in the course of which I perceived he intended to finish with a collection. And I silently resolved, he's going to get nothing from me. You know, I'm a tough guy. I had in my pocket a handful of copper money, 3 or 4 silver dollars, and 5 pistols in gold. As he proceeded, I began to soften and concluded to give the coppers. Another stroke of his oratory made me ashamed of that. I determined to give him the silver, and I finished. He emptied his pocket. So here is this tough scientist, and he cannot resist the rhetoric of Whitefield. It's marvelous, really. I mean, Franklin is as much enthralled by Whitefield as the simple farmer in Connecticut we read.
This could almost be an early example of an encounter between a journalist and an itinerant preacher.
Absolutely.
Fair enough. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, again, we think of Franklin as being unmoved by this kind of thing. But I remind you that although Franklin was himself a deist, right, right to the end of his life.
We have comments coming into that effect, you bet.
Yeah. What's, I think, probably more interesting is that a man who is for a clock at 20 years.
At least he's honest enough to tell us that.
Yeah. Now, some of you have asked earlier, and I think this is one of the it's a little long, and I apologize, maybe it's a little long to read, but you asked me here. And so
Tim, let me take some of the burden of this. You've been reading these quotations. Let me work our way through here. He had a loud and clear voice. He articulated his words and sentences so perfectly that he might be heard and understood at a great distance, especially as his auditors, however numerous, observed the most exact silence. He preached one evening from the top of the courthouse steps. This is the passage that goes to how the man reached his audiences, which are in the middle of Market Street on the west side of 2nd Street, which crosses it at right angles. Both streets were filled with his hearers to a considerable distance. Being among the hindmost in Market Street, I had the curiosity to learn how far he could be heard. Well, to come to the point here, this is somebody who really knew how to play to his audience, and you've got this scientific sensibility. Actually, he uses the word computing to measure how effective Whitefield was. 25,000 people in the fields.
Right. So this is wonderful. I mean, so Franklin turns Whitefield into a scientific experiment. He figures out how many people could get in a certain space, and then he multiplies it and divides it and listens. And at the end of the day, he says, yeah, this guy probably did reach that many people. Now we have another example that may shock some of the people tonight, but we know Whitefield went up to a town in Pennsylvania near Philadelphia called Germantown, and he lectured to 4,000 people for 3 hours. And it was later reported that they were all German speakers, and they understood not a word that Whitefield said, and yet they were riveted by the quality of just the cadences of his voice. We have stories like this.
There are people who tell stories today in our time about Billy Graham, the same effect when he goes overseas. He has the same powerful effect on speakers of other languages.
Yeah, I think it's very similar, and that's a good example. It's a almost hypnotic charisma these people have. Okay.
We come to the life and times of the Reverend Jesse Lee.
Yeah, and we may want to leave time. We don't want to go too fast, and return to some of the questions that people had at the beginning. I want to tell the participants that I chose Jesse Lee because he became an evangelical preacher. He was a poor farm boy from Virginia, born in Prince George's County. And he himself experienced the new birth, and he became, in the fullness of time, a Methodist clergyman. But you shouldn't be identified. He became a classic itinerant evangelical, and he wrote this wonderful account, a short account of the life and death of John, to be Jesse Lee, and became a major preacher. And so what we have here is during the American Revolution, and some of you are trying to make the connection between the Revolution and the Great Awakening. Jesse Lee was a conscientious objector. He wouldn't fight, but he was in the army, and when he wouldn't take up a gun, he was locked away in the jail. And so here we said, the sergeant came around with the guns, and he said, I told him, he says, well, take it away, or I would fall down the gun. And then he took me with him and delivered me to the guard. So what we have here is a preacher in the army, and he's taking what must have been a really unpopular position. I know some of you probably have experience of soldiers in your life. I mean, here's a guy in a fighting unit, and he says, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take up a gun. He wasn't a Tory. He just was a conscientious objector. So then what happens? What's the power? You can see here, Wayne, nice Sunday. I'll read because it's a very powerful. As soon as it was light, I was up, and I began to sing. Some hundreds of people assembled and joined with me. Remember, he's in prison. He's in the brig. And we made the plantation ring with the songs of Zion, and we kneeled down and prayed. And while I was praying, my soul was happy in God, and I wept much and prayed loud. And many of the poor soldiers also wept. Here they are. They're fighting men, and they're gathering around outside the prison. He's in there singing about Jesus, and they're all weeping. And I did not think I ever felt more willing to suffer for the sake of religion than I did at that time. If the participants want to know the power of this new evangelicalism, you can't do better than that quotation. Here he is. He won't fight, and yet the soldiers are hanging on. They're weeping, grown men weeping outside the jail. You there, Wayne?
I am here. I'm here. I'm waiting for the slide to change. Let me take this one on, Tim. Here again, the words of Jesse Lee. After I had been speaking a while, it began to rain, and we were under the necessity of going into the house, where I resumed my discourse. I was enabled to speak plainly and without fear. I wept while endeavoring to declare my message. Many of the people, officers as well as men, were bathed in tears before I was done. That meeting afforded me an ample reward for all my trouble. I felt my heart humble before God and was truly thankful to Him for the grace communicated to my soul. I had no doubt but that all things would work for my good. This is a marvelous example of the the emotional base, the psychological, the intensely individual psychological basis for the new evangelicalism that you were talking about earlier.
There's no feeling of embarrassment when you experience the new birth. You sometimes you speak in tongues, sometimes you fall on the ground, but most people just cried as they felt. They claim to throw off their old sinful ways and experience the new birth, and it's really moving to see tough adults going through this crisis. And of course, we see also, he says, officers as well as men. So we've seen rich and poor, officers and men, blacks and whites, men and women. There are no divisions about this new religious sensibility.
And the military sensibility too.
Absolutely. I mean, if you could imagine, they could have taken him out behind the tobacco barn and beaten the hell out of him. That could have happened, but it didn't, because they were in tune with what he was saying.
Okay, another quotation here from the Reverend Lee. On Sunday, the 13th of August, the army remained in their encampment, and in the afternoon, Mr. Lee again preached to the soldiers from Isaiah, chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. Many of the hearers were very solemn. Some of them wept freely under the preaching of the word. In these efforts to bring his fellow soldiers to the knowledge of salvation, he found many to oppose, but few to encourage him. So he did run into some resistance.
To some, but according to him, most of the detractors came around. And in fact, he went back home to Virginia and resumed his life as an itinerant evangelical.
Well, we're headed clearly in the direction of that discussion question there in the middle of the screen. The new religion seems to have radically affected huge numbers of Americans on the eve of the revolution. You set the stage for that part of our discussion, Tim. What do you think might be the connection, therefore, between evangelical religion and the revolution itself?
Well, this is a hard question, and I really would welcome the comments of all the panelists because, like me, you have to teach this material. It's very exciting, but very, very difficult. We know that the founding fathers, the great leaders, tended to be deistic and pretty low-key about their religious sensibilities, but not the fighting men, not the people that appeared at Bunker Hill and some of the other battles. By and large, these men were the children of this new evangelical religion. And we have their diaries, we have the testimony of the chaplains that went with them. And in battle or before battle, they were very much like the men that Reverend Lee encountered. Now, the question is, did the evangelical religion cause the revolution? That I can't say. But I can say that there was this new egalitarian spirit. Look, anybody, black or white, man or woman, who has experienced the new birth is as good as any other Christian. It gives you a sense of entitlement, Wayne, and clearly this must have created an atmosphere of people who are willing to challenge authority.
Well, the atmosphere that leads to the challenging of authority, but in the broadest sense, an atmosphere of transition and change, it's sort of priming the cultural pump, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we have a time here for some of the questions at the beginning.
Let me stop you and go to some of these forum questions that have come in as we get into tying all of this material together. Do you think, or is the topic shortchanged? Our topic of the First Great Awakening, setting the stage for the revolution, is it shortchanged in most history textbooks?
Well, again, I'd like to hear from the participants. I believe it is. I think the standard narrative that we have is one of the Benjamin Franklin types, of the Enlightenment gentlemen who are very well educated or have successful positions, such as Jefferson or Washington or Adams. And so we tell our story of the Revolution through the lives of great men doing great things who largely did not have a deep emotional commitment to religion.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that they were against it, but they weren't moved by it.
Is there any evidence that, pick your founder, so to speak, is there any evidence that, apart from these rather casual observations that Benjamin Franklin offers, is there any evidence that Whitefield or somebody like Whitefield directly connected to, influenced the life of one of the life or lives of one of our so-called founding fathers?
No, there's almost no evidence. I think Whitefield made the founding fathers uneasy. It's sort of like the uncle that's a little odd. You know, you don't want to invite to Thanksgiving. He spoke to the masses. He wasn't clubbable. He wasn't a university type. And so while it was no one criticized him terribly, they didn't play up his contribution. I'd like to tell a little story
Sure.
that may make this connection, and I'd be interested to see the reaction of the participants tonight. Whitefield came. You know, sometimes I tell my undergraduates, and I don't mean to make light of Whitefield. I think he was a very important man. But I sometimes say it's like the Beatles coming to America, you know, tour after tour, and huge masses of people coming out, highly emotional and whatnot. And his last great tour occurred in 1770. And he came to New England, up north of Boston, and he died. He had a stroke, and he died in Newburyport. And he was buried in the crypt of the foundation of that church. So there he lay. A few years later, when early in 1776, New Englanders, the war was launching, and a group of New England soldiers were assembled for an attack on Canada that was British. They thought they could have a lightning attack. And so they had about 2,000 raw American troops, Wayne, and they assembled. They were drilling outside the church where Whitefield was buried. We know this. This is a terrific story. And they went and they heard a sermon by the Reverend Spring, and it was a very moving sermon. He was preparing them for what was going to be a hard battle. In fact, most of them did not come back alive. The mortality in this attack on Canada was horrific, but they didn't know it yet. After the sermon, some of the soldiers noted that Whitefield was buried in the basement of the church. And so they went down there and they opened the tomb of the great evangelical figure. And while the body was molded, the garments, his clerical garments, were not. And each American soldier, preparing for battle, knowing how they lined up, and each one took a little bitty piece of the cloth of Whitefield's garment and pinned it onto their military uniform, a kind of amulet of the Great Awakening that was energizing and consoling these simple soldiers that were going into battle. I think that's a powerful story.
This is the American analog for remnants or splinters of the cross.
Exactly.
A replication, as it were, of earlier religious history. Tim, one of our participants asks if you could go back and talk a little bit more about the biographical circumstances or sequence of Whitefield's life, when he was born, when he died, sense of where he lived, and give us a couple of minutes on that, would you please?
I'll give it a try. And he was born over in Wells, and in the shadow of Wells Cathedral. He came from what you'd call a middling family. As I say, many people thought he was going to be an actor and he was actually apparently did a little of that. But he was able, through a scholarship, to go up to Oxford University, to a place called Pembroke College at Oxford, and that's where he met the Wesley brothers, and he was moved by them. But he did not, in fact, take up Methodism. He always remained, in some ways, an Anglican, but beyond that, this kind of evangelical. And so very quickly he learned that he could take the word of Christ to on the road. And so he had his first revivals in England, in London, and in Wales. He reports, Wayne, in one of his early stories, these tough Welsh miners. They were coal miners, and they'd come to church with blackened faces from the coal dust, and they would cry, the tears, and you could see the white streaks of their tears down. These are tough Welsh miners. And then he took the tour to Ireland, and he took it to Scotland, and then finally America. It became, in other words, the Great Awakening is not an American experience; it's an Atlantic experience of this new form of religion. And go ahead.
Question about the relationship between the very broad notion of romanticism in Europe in the 18th century, the relationship between romanticism in Europe and the First Great Awakening. I'm assuming that our participant is curious about the emotional context for that would surround both of these.
Right. The romantic movement, as such as it is as I remember, a little later, early 19th century. Look, I think the story of English history in this period is been as maybe mistaken as some of our own. I mean, the English history talks about the Enlightenment. This is the time of Locke, of Hume, of Newton, and they're bringing rationality. You all teach this. You understand Newton transforms the universe. But then you look at a guy like Whitefield. He's going around England, and he's preaching to thousands, tens of thousands of people. This is not the story of the Enlightenment. This is the story of a new form of religion in England itself. And getting back to our original point, you can bring religion back into the classroom without defending one faith over another faith or making fun of certain religious values. It was a phenomenon that transformed the lives of the masses, not just the elite.
Want to stress, Tim, that any of our participants who have questions about the material that you've seen that Tim has used tonight in the PowerPoint, it's all available on the original website that you went to sign up for the seminar, so you can retrieve that material and use it in your classes. Tim, the consensus seems to be from our participants that yes, indeed, the First Great Awakening is not given the respect that it's due as a force or an element, a precursor of the American Revolution. As we move toward a wrap up here, could you reflect on that a little bit more, please?
Well, I noticed that one person, blessedly, he or she is going to be my favorite person, mentioned my own last book, which is called American Insurgents, American Patriots.
That was a planted participant, Tim, but
good.
We'll just overlook that tonight.
Well, the money's in the mail. What I tried to do in that book was to restore the great mass of ordinary people to the story of their own revolution. Frankly, I got a little sick of just hearing about the same 20 leaders, as if these guys could have affected independence. And so I dug down. I wanted to find out what was happening to the ordinary people in the revolution, how they mobilized, how they made the sacrifice in their families that might lead to their own death. I mean, after all, it's one thing to debate at a constitutional convention. It's another thing to go in battle against the redcoats. And I was interested in what was going on. And if you look at my book, I have a chapter on their religious sensibilities, and most of these young men were touched by the new evangelical faith, the new form. When I say that touch, it's a new emotional linkage of you feel the religion rather than think it. And you read, as I did, the sermons of the chaplaincy corps. Washington was very reluctant to form a chaplaincy in America. The reason is he thought it would be very, very dangerous. Then he thought, well, maybe here we're going to have the Pennsylvania line or the New England line, and there's going to be Baptists and Methodists and Congregations. And these guys are going to fight each other over which religion. That's not what happened. What happened was it didn't matter what faith they came from. They were all part of the evangelical movement. And what they did is they came together in a kind of default religion of felt new birth. And so, in fact, rather than dividing the American army, the new religion actually brought greater continuity and coherence to it.
Well, let me raise a related point that came up in the forum. Let's get real personal with Professor Breen. How do you teach the First Great Awakening without raising the so-called God questions that are just unavoidable? They're going to come up in high school classes as well as college courses. Do you have a strategy for that as you go into your lectures and discussions?
Well, I expose my students to many of the kinds of documents that we've looked at tonight. By the way, as an aside, Wayne, I might say you might notice the participants tonight, I didn't use any of Whitefield's sermons. They're printed, and you'd think, well, boy, that would have been the first thing I would have selected. But I must say, Whitefield's sermons are like, sometimes you go out for a walk in the woods and you see a wildflower, a beautiful flower, and you pick it because it's so beautiful, and you bring it home, and by the time it gets home, it's kind of lost its color and excitement, and you say, what happened to that flower? Well, that's what happened to Whitefield's sermons. When you read them, they're kind of flat. I wonder as a historian when I read them, how could this have mobilized 10,000 people? It's like a dead butterfly rather than an alive one. So how I teach it is I look at people like Cole and Franklin and others and see how they reacted, and their lives were reportedly changed. I don't ask questions about sincerity. I don't ask questions about whether Whitefield really was in touch with Jesus or not. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. I can't prove it. But all I can say is that more Americans were coming forward for religious support than ever before in new ways.
We have a comment here from one of our participants who very much on the same wavelength there. We need to teach the history, not the sermons themselves.
Right. The sermons, by and large, take partisan positions, and their sermons, frankly, are very hard to teach, even good ones. And frankly, Whitefield's, you needed a guy to feel the religion. The words, the printed words don't quite do it. But there's no question that religion has been a major force, and all of you who teach the coming of the Civil War. Look, the young men that fought in the Civil War, just like those in the Revolution, they were the sons of the evangelical movement. They were the sons of the Second Great Awakening, just like the revolutionaries were the first. And we can talk all we want about leaders, but if you want to feel the emotional content that people are going to risk their lives for a cause, you've got to deal with this emotional underpinning of their lives.
Two final points here. There may be others that come up. We have about 10 minutes to go, Tim, but let me pose this question to you that came up in the forum. Is it fair to equate the Great Awakening with the notion of equality as a prelude to the Revolution and the development of the early Republic?
Ideas about equality were around. There was a philosopher, Locke, that talked about equality and so on. What I think what the religious experience does is give people a powerful experience of what I call almost practicing equality. For your grandfather was preached at by the minister. He was told what to believe. Now, suddenly, after 1740, you find yourself in a position of questioning, challenging, of having the same sense of new birth as your neighbor. And so this must have, I believe this profoundly, that there was a growing sense of felt equality on the ground that if it didn't lead to the revolution, certainly led to a powerful sense of egalitarianism that has defined American political life for a very long time.
Well, you can see in the broadest of strokes, Tim, you can see a line being drawn here between from Cotton Mather to Jonathan Edwards to George Whitefield, and then into our time, figures like Billy Graham and Oral Roberts.
Right. And I think many people that write textbooks, and certainly many of our leaders, have felt uncomfortable just the way, and that's why I gave Chauncy, the minister from Boston, they look out at this and where the evangelicals see the new birth and a powerful sense of equality, the critics see frenzy, mass movements, dangerous mobs working. And I suppose that you could say that's the two sides of the same coin, but the elite critics have never taken emotional and felt religion seriously. They see it as a danger to their own position in society.
Did Whitefield die a wealthy man? Middle class is a term that we have to wait for the social scientists to go to work in the 19th and 20th centuries, but
no, he didn't seem to amass much money. He didn't seem to care that bit, and when he did engage in a few business enterprises, he seemed to have been really bad at it. That was not his forte.
Was his reputation on the continent as strong as it was here?
It certainly was in England and Ireland. Absolutely. And and in Ireland, it's very, very interesting because there were very few Protestants in Ireland and masses of Catholics. And his revivals must have seemed very strange in that land, but there you go. He was popular everywhere.
All right. Well, Tim, we're just about out of time. Let me move through the remainder of our PowerPoint slides here.
Well, let me just quickly say, because you're going through it, how privileged I feel to be able to share these ideas with the panelists and the participants tonight. And if they have questions after this night, I'll try, and I'm sure you and others at the center will try to answer their questions about this important area.
Absolutely. You certainly can be in touch. Ladies and gentlemen, the Humanities Center encourages you to use the forum, first to continue the discussion, to share fresh approaches, reflections on your teaching. The center will monitor the forum until November the 20th. To collate all of that material, which will be available to you. Down there at the bottom of the slide, don't forget the poster. That is a freebie. We ask you please to submit your evaluations, and we will get that poster in the mail to you just as soon as we hear from you. Tim, let me thank you for an excellent presentation, and thanks to all of our participants scattered to the four corners of the earth. You've been active and you have been engaged, and we're very grateful for your responses and your participation in in this seminar tonight. Tim, thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our seminar on the First Great Awakening and its relationship to the American Revolution. Please check the Center's website frequently. There will be listings there of the upcoming seminars. Of course, we want you to come back and sign up for another 1 or 2 or 3 soon. So from the Humanities Center and from Evanston, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for participating tonight, and good evening.